Is it working? What's up, my peeps? All right, trying out some new software. See how this works. So if you can't hear me or can't see me, please let me know. So we'll let some people hop on here. All right, got it up on my phone. Good. Let me know. Look, Scott's here, Simon's here, Brad's here. Sweet. All right, so this is people. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm trying out some new software. I'm using some different speakers and let's see, who's commenting? Let's see. Tyler's here, Jorge's here, just cool. Brad says hello, perfect. So that's weird. So if you see me looking that way, I have my giant TV set up and it has all the comments popping right above my computer, but it doesn't say who they're from. So that's weird. Let's see. Now I can do this, watch. Ready? Look, see, it says, what's up, people? That's kind of cool. All right, enough playing around. So Scott, can you hear me now? I don't want to get too far into this. Leanne says she can hear me. Brad is hearing me. He said, hey, Jess. Scott, can you hear me yet? All right, we'll let it catch up a little bit. There's a little bit of a lag between the feed and, all right, Scott says we're all good now. Cool. All right, so happy Friday, y'all. It's been quite a week this week. I apologize ahead of time. We've had some crazy storms here in Winter Haven, Florida. We've lost power a couple times. So if all of a sudden I just go blank and I'm not here, that's probably what's happening. But we should be good to go. So everyone says they can hear me. Sweet. All right. So I said it earlier, I have some new software I'm using. So if you see me looking off this direction, that's because I have my giant TV right here with the comments going, and that's where I can kind of see and navigate what is going on. I have my laptop in front of me too. But all right, so let's do this right here. All right, cool. So tonight we're gonna have a double header. We're gonna talk about two pretty foundational topics that I think everyone can benefit from. We're gonna talk about different types of running, and we're also gonna talk about warming up and cooling down and kind of how to do it, what the research says, and so on. So I anticipate tonight we'll go maybe 20 minutes. It should be pretty quick, but it'll be packed full of good stuff. Cool, some more people hopping on. All right, so let me come over to this, get the laser pointer up. All right, see the laser, woo! Sorry, I'm just pretty excited because I have this new software finally working. All right, so up first, we're gonna talk about different types of runs. So I remember when I first started running, and I would hear all these more experienced runners talk about, well, I need to do a tempo and I need to go at race pace. And well, what's your mile race? I didn't know anything what they were talking about. I thought you just ran. And I think a lot of people still think that way. They think that, okay, you just run. I mean, I know a lot of runners who think that, well, how hard is it? You just put your shoes on, you go out the door and you run. Well, yes, but there's different parts of running. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight's going to be, how tonight's going to go is there's going to be a little bit of an introduction. We're going to talk about the importance of varying your runs. And then we're going to dive into specifically what kind of runs there are and what exactly they mean. And then kind of towards the end, we'll talk about a few other things. But first, we're going to talk about the importance of varying your runs. So the reason to add different types of runs into your training is to help stress the body in different ways to promote growth. So I think non-runners, when they, like I said before, they just think you just go and run. If that's all we did, we really wouldn't get any faster. We'd just maintain a certain pace and that'd be it. We wouldn't really gain anything from it. We'd hit this plateau. So it's important to add these different kinds of runs, and we're going to talk about those different kinds of runs in a second. So on that note, there's something called the SAID principle, which stands for specific adaptation to imposed demands. So this is a kind of a physiology term. So basically what it means is when you do something specific, as far as adding some kind of good stress to your body will adapt based on that stress. So for example, if you want to train for a marathon, you're going to do marathon type workouts. You're going to do the mileage. You're going to do longer marathon pace things. You're not going to go out there and go and do like 100-meter sprints or do things that a sprinter would. You're imposing different demands. So that principle kind of sticks true through everything, whether you're a runner, you're a swimmer, biker. whatever you do specifically to your body's going to adapt from it. So the body's always trying to get better at exactly what you practice. So like I said, if you only run at one pace, you'll eventually reach the point where the gains are not existent and the adaptation won't occur anymore. So a lot of times I think people tend to just stick with what works for them. They run at a comfortable pace, and then they start to wonder, well, why am I not getting any faster? Well, this is exactly why. You have to add specific stresses to your body to get better. So one of the things I like to do is when I'm starting a new training plan, I think of this training plan as a giant stone, like I'm a sculptor. And by the goal race, I want to chisel down, all that excess stone down to something beautiful, like a beautiful masterpiece. So running is the same way. You have to chisel away the big chunks at first. Yeah, that's going to be, a little sloppy, but you're getting the big things out of the way first. And as you go on and you get to that final product, you'll start finessing it. You'll start doing little things to like sand down the edges or sharpen things here and there. Training plans are the same way, and I'm going to show you why in a second. So where do we begin? So up first, we're going to talk about what is an easy run. So I know some of these questions may seem kind of like, well, duh, everyone knows that. But not everyone really does. I know sometimes I think that way. I think, well, everyone should just know this. And then I talk to someone, I'm like, oh, they really didn't know that. So here we go. We're going to talk about the foundational stuff. All right. So what is an easy run? So my golden rule for easy runs is make your easy days easier. And here's why. So an easy run is a sustained run of a certain time or distance done at conversation pace. So if you remember, what was it, last week or the last video we did where I talked about what Rory Linkletter from NAZ Elite said? He said your easy run or your recovery pace should be at a pace that if you were to double the distance you're running, you would feel comfortable doing. Now, I'm not going to get into specific paces right now, like, well, an easy run is from this pace to this pace, because we're all different. My easy pace is something completely different than, than Scott's easy pace or Jess' easy pace. Who else here? Stephanie's here. All of us have different easy paces. Hey, Justin hopped on. So I'm not going to get into the specifics right now, but just know that easy pace should be at a conversation pace. It should not be taxing to the body. You should feel good. You should feel like, yeah, you ran a little bit, but you shouldn't be spent. You shouldn't, as soon as you finish, put your hands on your knees and, huff and puff. And that's not an easy run. So easy run should make up a fairly large portion of your training schedule. Coaches kind of vary in the percentage, but as a good rule of thumb, about 60% of your weekly miles should be easy. So think of your easy days as chiseling away the large chunks or smoothing out the rough areas. So you're chiseling away the big chunk of stone to get to that final project. So next is, what is a hard run? Well, duh, Jason, a hard run is the opposite of an easy run. Well, my golden rule for hard runs is keep your workouts on workout days. So what I mean by that is the purpose of a hard run is to do something very specific to your body. So remember that SAID principle, specific adaptation. So a hard run could be some kind of speed work. It could be some kind of distance. It could be something with some amount of recovery. It kind of varies. Everyone has their own definition of a hard run and what is hard to them. So my golden rule of keep your workouts on your workout days is meaning don't add extra stuff on days that you don't want it to be. So if you're having several easy days, keep your easy days easy. Don't throw in, a bunch of mile repeats into, a day that's supposed to be a recovery day. So don't be confused by a hard run versus a long run. There are some differences there, and we'll talk about that in a second. So a long run is a sustained run of a certain time or distance done at a level where conversation is labored and or impossible. So when you're running, if you're running hard, you really shouldn't be able to have a conversation. If you can, you could probably speed up just a little bit. So hard runs should make up no more than 10 to 20% of the weekly miles. Hard runs can include workouts. So think of your hard days as chiseling away specific or smaller sections of the sculpture. If you have this giant stone and you've knocked off the big pieces and now you're trying to chisel down into something smaller, you're not going to just take a big hammer and just keep whacking at it. You're going to be very finessed and very careful and meticulous in what you do. So that is a hard run. So now what is a long run? So my golden rule for a long run is 20 to 30% of your weekly mileage should be your long run. So if you're running 20 miles a week, your long run should not be 15 of those miles. That seems kind of like, well, duh, that's a given. But, there it is. So long runs are usually only one time a week. Sometimes you may do kind of a medium effort long run. So a lot of marathon plans, you'll do a long run on the weekend, and then maybe 2 or 3 kind of shorter runs in the middle of the week, plus one additional, I say medium long run, meaning it's not long, but it's not short. It's kind of right smack in the middle. So when in doubt, a normal long run is essentially an easy run, but longer. So if you're going for a long run, when in doubt, just keep it easy. Let's see here. So the purpose of the long run is it helps our body increase glycogen efficiency. So now we're going to get into some physiology stuff. So this may be a little over some of your heads. Just kind of bear with me. We'll get through it. So long runs help increase your glycogen efficiency. So glycogen is a form of sugar that's in your body. That's how you store glucose in your body. So when you run, glycogen is one of the fuel sources. Fat's another, and protein is another. There's 3 different kinds. So glycogen. So long runs put us on the brink of exhausting glycogen stores in the body. So the body adapts by increasing the glycogen storage capacity. So when you're training, and if this has happened to you, let me know in the comments. But when you're training for a race or like a longer run, and you just feel like you could just eat everything after your runs, I know that happens to me all the time. Like on every Saturday long run, that's how I feel. I run. I'm like, man, I just can eat the entire world. This is why right here. Your body's trying to adapt by increasing the storage capacity. So if your body can adapt by increasing the storage capacity on your next long run, you'll be able to have that much more glycogen in your body ready to go. Psychologically, actually, let me back up. So I said it helps with glycogen. It also helps recognize fat as a fuel source. So our bodies have a lot more fat storage than glycogen storage. It's about so if you were to say 1 gram of glycogen is equal to about 10 grams of fat stored in your body. So there's quite a bit more fat. And fat can be a great fuel source. We just have to know how to tap into it. And maybe we'll talk about that in another training. But also psychologically, long runs often test our mental strength and help us prepare for race day. So I know for me, this has always been my downfall with marathon training, is I can have the plan mapped out, but if I start missing some of those longer runs, I think, oh, I could just make it up later. And that's not the case. If you're doing those long runs, your body, not only physically, but psychologically, will be more prepared for that race. So that's a long run. All right, so now we're going to talk about striders. So some people call these stride outs, some people call these sprints, some people call these strides. It's all kind of one and the same. So my golden rule for striders is this should never be an all-out sprint. So I help coach cross country and track. Well, when the coronavirus isn't around, I help coach cross country and track. And one of the things I always see some of the athletes doing is on their striders, they're either hauling butt or they're not doing anything. They're just kind of jogging, and that defeats the whole purpose of a strider. So striders are kind of speed work in disguise. So if you can do striders pretty much any day of the week. You can do it after just about any run, and it's a great way to just get the legs turning over, and it's a great way to tax the body just enough so you can run fast on tired legs. So me personally, I like to do striders at the end of my runs. I still count it in my mileage. So if I'm going out for like a 7-mile run, when I'm done, I'll go do 7 striders afterwards. I like to do them on the grass, so I'm not on the concrete. But that's kind of what I do. For however many miles I run, I'll add that many striders. So striders should be between 50 and 100 meters. Your target is 85% of your maximum effort. So not all out, not too slow. It should be taxing, but not like you're dying at the end of it. Your main goal is to focus on form and running fast while being relaxed. Take your time between each one. It's not about who could be the fastest. It's about how smooth and how fluid you could run. All right, so you guys still with me? We're going to pause for a second. Let's see who's here. We have Mark here, April here, Michael hopped on, Bill's here. So we got a bunch of people hopping on. Hey, Natalie's here. Hey, Natalie. So let's see, we're going 15 minutes. All right, so maybe I lied. Maybe this won't be 20 minutes. All right, maybe I just rambled too much. All right, so everyone's favorite word, fartlek. So what is a fartlek? So a fartlek is a Swedish word for speed play. Fartlek, hey, Stephanie says hi. Scott says I go 125% stressing out. Yeah, Scott goes all out. He has a good heart. He's a good guy. You do a lot. So yeah, fartlek is Swedish word for speed play. Brad says this is great info. I feel fast already. Great. I feel that makes me happy, Brad. Keep listening because we're going to talk about some better stuff in a second. So fartleks force you to go by effort instead of pace and distance. So when you're doing a fartlek in the middle of a run, the whole goal is not to be looking at your watch the entire time trying to figure out how fast you're going. You're not supposed to check to see how far you're going, how fast. It's all based on effort. So when I do fartleks, what I like to do is I'll find some big grass field or a big park or somewhere I can just kind of run in circles or different directions. Fartlek should be, just kind of exactly, it's speed play. It's just something, it should be fun. The entire focus is making sure that you dial in onto your effort and not so much of speed. So this is great for marathon and ultra marathoners who want to add some generic speed without having to do like specific intervals. So there's not too many ultra marathoners that will go out and do, 40 miles of 400s because they're training for a 100-mile race. It doesn't work like that. Fartleks help with leg turnover and help kind of build lactic threshold and so on. But it's also great for runners in the beginning, whether you're beginning a new training plan or you're just a new runner altogether, that want to get faster. So fartleks are really great because it allows you to just run fast, and you don't have to worry about how fast you're going. It's just all based on effort. So if you've never done a fartlek before, one of my favorite fartleks to do is an ascending ladder and a descending ladder based on time. So what I'll do is I'll do maybe a 5-10 minute warm up, and then I'll do 1 minute hard. 1 minute hard, or just whatever I perceive hard to be that day. Then I'll take a 1 minute break. Not a break, but a 1 minute easy. Then I'll go to 2 minutes hard, and then 2 minutes easy, or 3 minutes hard, 3 minutes easy. You could even, instead of doing 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes easy, you could do just 1 minute easy. But what I'll do is I'll build up to 5 and go back down. And I remember when I started running, that was one of the things that we did, especially after cross-country practice. We'd play ultimate frisbee, and ultimate frisbee was a great way, to get injured, and that happened, but a great way to build speed as well as just kind of relax and have fun. So that is the fartlek. So if everyone asks you, well, what's a fartlek? Now you know. All right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the good stuff. So this is what I call the hierarchy of speeds. So some of this data I pulled from the NAZ Elite training programs, as well as the Luke Humphrey running programs. I've kind of mixed it together and put my own spin on it. So this is speed according to Jason. So the way to look at this is start at the bottom and make your way up. So the green is easier pace, the orange is a harder pace. So as you go up, that's how your speed increases. So an easy pace should be a pace that you can maintain to 3 to 4 hours running, or a conversation pace. Something called steady state is what comes next. Now, a little caveat to this, I know these paces may all be different depending on what you're training for. If you're training for a marathon versus 5K, it all kind of changes. So just think of this as just general info. So a steady state is a pace you can maintain for 2 hours of racing. In the next slide, I'll give an example of how easy and steady state overlap a little bit. So next is tempo. Now I know I've seen it in some of the running groups out there. There's been a discussion of, well, what is a tempo run? Some people would just call tempo any kind of speed. To me, a tempo is a pace that you can maintain for 1 hour of racing. So we had 3 to 4 hours, 2 hours, now we have 1 hour. Then after tempo, we have what's called your VO2 max. So your VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen that you can take in and process without burning up, without your lactic acid. Let me back up. So your VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen you can intake with being able to clear lactic acid. There we go. In other words, your VO2 max, it should be a pace that you can maintain at, pace you could race at for 30 minutes. And then lastly is mile pace, which is whatever pace you could race at for a mile. So that's kind of what I go through when I'm building training plans, or I'm going through a training plan myself. This is kind of that hierarchy of speeds. Initially in the training plan, it'll be all easy, maybe a little bit of steady state and strides. Once I get through that initial base phase and I go into kind of the phase 2 of it, I'll start adding more tempo and adding maybe some intervals with VO2 max. But when you're doing longer stuff, mile race pace is usually not touched. Mile race pace usually only hangs around when you're doing the shorter stuff. All right, so here's an example. So I know not all of you can run an hour and 30-minute half marathon. Some of you in this group may be like, well, that's like a walk in the park. This is just think about this. Okay, so if your goal is to run a 1:30 half, that's about 6 minutes and 52 seconds per mile. So this, if you were to go to the Hansen marathon or the Luke Humphrey pace calculator, as well as using some of the NAZ Elite pacing charts, this is kind of the data that you'll get spit back out. This Corey says, I wish. Hey, you'll get there. Don't worry. All right, so easy pace. When you plug it into this calculator, it says your easy pace should be between 8:39 to 9 minutes and 30 seconds per mile. Now, that could be a little bit faster, could be a little bit slower, but that's kind of the goal, is that area. Remember, your easy pace, your true easy / recovery pace should be at a conversational pace. It should be something that you can maintain for 3 to 4 hours if you had to run 3 to 4 hours. Now, if you're training for a 5K, obviously you're not going to run 3 to 4 hours to train for a 5K, but just kind of use it as a rule of thumb. So steady state, in this case, would be 7:39 to 9:09 per mile, or remember, this is for 2 hours of racing. Now, you notice there's some overlap there. So easy and steady state kind of go back and forth a little bit. There is some wiggle room that you can kind of bounce back and forth. Some research has suggested that there's really no added benefit from training for longer than 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now, granted, that's not looking at what ultramarathoners are doing. That's not looking at what elite marathoners are doing. This is just kind of 80% of people as a whole. So after steady state, we have tempo. So this would be what you could do, remember, for 1 hour of racing. So this would be between 6:34 and 6:51. So note the tempo pace in this case is just slightly faster than what your race pace would be. Remember, your race pace is 6:52 per mile, and your tempo, your goal is 1 hour of racing. Well, that makes sense, right? If you're running a race for an hour and a half, it's going to be a little bit slower than what this tempo pace would be. Next is VO2 max. So this, if you were doing like interval training, so if you were doing like mile repeats, maybe not mile repeats, like 2 mile repeats or like longer intervals, and we'll talk about what intervals are in a second. This would be between 5:52 and 6:18 per mile. And of course, mile race pace would be 5:35 to 5:50. So that's kind of an example. I'll post some links to that calculator that you guys can check out. It's kind of fun to just plug in numbers and kind of see what it says you should do. And then you look back at what you've been doing and think, oh, well, I can do better here. I could slow down here or speed up here. Sometimes it's good to just kind of fact check yourself a little bit. All right, does that make sense to everyone? I know I kind of crashed through that really fast. There's a lot of terminology and all kinds of things to kind of process. Again, I'll post a link to this presentation in the units tab of the Facebook group. So if you guys want to download it, you can download it. It's all yours. Do whatever with it. All right, so we're almost done with this section. All right, so last couple of things. So some other kind of housekeeping things. You may hear people say, well, what is a lactic threshold run? So in my mind, a lactic threshold run is very similar to what we just talked about as a tempo run. Your lactic threshold run is the most effective, well, let me back up. Is the most effective way to increase your lactic threshold is to train at or just below your current lactic threshold. It's like, well, yeah. So think of it in terms of half marathon training. Your lactic threshold is usually in half marathons is usually pretty close to what your race pace will be. Because depending how long you're running, at least for me personally, my lactic threshold and tempo is maybe a little slower than race pace. But anyways, the goal is to stress your body in a way that can just barely manage triggering adaptation. So this is a very fine line. So when you're doing a lactic threshold run, you want to have the blinders on. You want to be at a specific pace or effort that entire time. So if your lactic threshold pace needs to be at 6 flat, you don't want to go do some of it at 5:40. You don't want to do some of it at like 6:30. You want it right smack in the middle, because when you walk that fine line, it's like pulling the rubber band and just keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling. It's like, okay, we're gonna let it back now. If you just keep pulling too hard, it's gonna snap. So it's a very fine line. So lactic threshold is perhaps the most important physiological marker for performance in longer races. So if you can nail down a solid lactic threshold run at a pace close to your race pace, chances are you can run that pace. Sorry, my phone's blown up. You could run the pace that you need to in your race. So let's talk about a 5K example. So say you wanted to run a 20-minute 5K. You're going to do a lot of speed work at around 6:15, 6:30. We talked about this last time. You're going to do a lot about 6:15, 6:30 because that's a little bit faster than race pace, but it's kind of hovering around that area. So if you're training to go for sub 20, you're not going to go do like 5 flat mile repeats or anything. You want to kind of keep it within the fence line. All right. So in my opinion, lactic threshold is the most critical pace to make sure you're doing correctly. We just talked about this because if you run too fast, the blood lactate increases too quickly and you can't feed it through, you can't filter it, creating too much stress on the system. So have you ever run a workout where you go out super hard that first rep, or maybe you do this in the race, you go super hard that first mile, and then all of a sudden your legs start screaming and you start feeling that burn and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And you immediately regret all of your decisions. That's probably because you went beyond that lactic threshold. On the other side of that coin, if you run too slowly, then you miss out on the desired effect. You're just kind of running faster, but you're not really getting the full benefit. So my golden rule for lactic threshold is to be honest in your pace. What I mean by that is be honest with where you need to be. So I think sometimes runners fall into the mindset, okay, well, my goal is to be a whatever half marathoner. So I'm going to do all of my speed work at that pace. That you may be able to handle a few reps of that, but in the long run, you're not going to be able to handle that just because your body hasn't adapted to it. You can't really jump up to the top rung of the ladder without climbing those steps before that. And that's exactly what lactic threshold runs do, is they help you go from this step to this step to this step to this step. And if you do it correctly, you'll be able to get up there. So Brad says, been there. Corey says, that was me yesterday doing speed work way too fast for 80-second repeats starting out. Yeah, it's tough. So for me, when I do 400s, that always happens. I always go out way too hard the first one. I'm like, okay, time to dial it back a little bit. But, all right, so now we're going to talk about intervals. I've already mentioned intervals a little bit, so we'll just kind of breeze through this. But if you hear someone say, okay, I'm going to go do repeats, usually they're talking about intervals. Now, as a timeout to this is if you read Jack Daniel's running formula, he uses some different vernacular. He has repeats as its own classification of speed and intervals as its own classification of speed. I don't usually roll with that just because it gets too complicated. I like to keep it simple. That's why I have those 5 or 6 different levels. But anyways, so intervals could be anything from 400s to 800s to mile, etc. Intervals are essentially that. They're an interval of distance or time that you're trying to run at a certain speed. Usually there's some kind of slow jog or just kind of standing around, some time in between the intervals. So some of my favorite interval workouts are 12 by 400 meters. So I'll do 12 by 400 meters at 5K race pace, whatever that may be. And then I'll have about 60 to 90 seconds of active recovery in between. So that means jogging around, walking, basically just keep moving and not standing still. One of my other favorite intervals is either 5 or 6 by 1 mile at whatever race pace that needs to be. So if I'm doing marathon or half marathon or whatever, do 5 by 1 mile with 400-meter recovery. And then one of my other favorite is a ladder workout. You can do ladder workouts, like I said earlier, kind of like a fartlek style, where you just go by time. Or you could do distance, like a 400, 800, 1200 mile. So you climb up the ladder and then you go back down the ladder, 1200, 800, 400. And you could do whatever recovery in between there. So those are intervals. So last part of this first part of this doubleheader. So I think a lot of times people in groups on Facebook and in public, they say, well, what's the easiest way I can get faster without adding more mileage? Because honestly, that is kind of the first answer is, well, how do I get fast? Well, run more, obviously. Maybe not double your weekly mileage, but by running more, your body will adapt more. I know when I run, it's weird. If I run 30 miles or less a week, I kind of get stuck at this one level. But if I go to like 40 or 50 miles a week, then I'm at this other level. And when I've hit those like 60 to 70 mile weeks, I feel like I can fly at a different level. So I mean, I should say obviously, but that's kind of the first answer. But if you don't have time to add mileage, or maybe you're not at a point in your life where you can add mileage, here's some other things that you can do to get faster. So one is add striders 3 to 4 times a week. So if you're running 5 to 6 days a week, add striders 3 to 4 of those days. So I like to do them at the end of my runs. Like I said, if I do 7 miles, I'll go do 7 striders. I like to do them on the grass, not on concrete. You can do them on hills, which kind of leads us into the next point. So my other recommendation is to add hills, not just up hills, but also down hills. So when I was back west in 2014 and 2015, everywhere is a hill. There's mountains everywhere. You're always running up. You're always running down. There's very little flat land. And one of my favorite workouts would be to start at the bottom of this hill. I'd go easy up the hill. It was about half mile or so. I get to the top and I turn around and then run down as fast as I could. And I do like 8 to 10 of these. So a couple things. Not only does that build muscle strength and muscle endurance because you're eccentrically loading those muscles, it also is not an easy way, but kind of a cheat way to get faster because your body has to go faster going downhill. It's a lot harder to pump the brakes going down the hill than it is to pump the brakes on flat land. So hills, like striders, are kind of speed work in disguise, and hills build strength. And lastly, one other recommendation I suggest if you want to get faster is to add a tempo run. So my go-to tempo run for most of my running is to do a 10-minute warm-up, then do 20 minutes at about 15 seconds slower than race pace, and then a 10-minute cool down. So I've been running the majority of my 5Ks the last several years of my life, anywhere between 60 minutes and 18 minutes or so. So if I'm going a 20-minute tempo run, about 15 seconds slower than race pace, I'm still getting a full 5K and maybe a little bit more. But like we talked about lactic threshold, that allows me to build that lactic threshold higher so I can go faster. So over the course of a training plan, that tempo run will get better and it'll get more smooth. So, that was a lot. Wow, 32 minutes. Man, you guys got to tell me to just like stop talking and move on or something. Just, I don't know, do something to make me keep going. But I mean, I hope that was helpful for some of you. So, I mean, I know we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different levels of running knowledge. Come back to this presentation frequently if you have questions. Like I said, I pulled a lot of this from Luke Humphrey Running, which used to be known as the Brooks team, Hanson's Running, as well as the NAZ Elite Training Program. And I've kind of pulled that, as well as I have 4 or 5 different books that I've kind of, running according to Jason, I guess. But this is what the research says. And yeah, so let's see. Course a tempo run for what race distance we are training for. So that tempo run at the bottom, usually that's for me, is either a 5K or 10K. If I'm training for like a half marathon, I'll do a longer tempo run, maybe 30 to 40 minutes. Or I'll do like a hill circuit where pretty close to where we live, we have a bunch of hills, like a neighborhood with a bunch of hills, and we'll go run that a bunch of times. But yeah, on that 20-minute tempo is what I do for 5K, 10K stuff. So, all right, well, let's move on to topic number 2. This one will be a little bit faster just because there's not quite as much of me to explain. Not quite as much as for me. Man, I can't even speak anymore. I've talked too much. There's not a lot for me to explain. It's kind of straightforward. Process, great info. Can't wait to print these charts out. Yeah, for sure. So as soon as this is over, I'll upload it to the units and it'll be there for you to have. All right, so warming up and cooling down. So I know there's a lot of conflicting information. Well, what does a warm-up entail? What about cooling down? Is cooling down really necessary? We're gonna talk about that. So a lot of times people say, well, why do I need to run before I run? I mean, aren't I just gonna go run? But won't I warm up while I'm racing? Well, yeah, but if you're running a shorter race, it's good to warm up a little bit because this will get your body moving, it'll get your heart pumping, and here's why. We'll talk about it. So the primary purpose of a warm-up is to increase one's core temperature. So this may be a little too deep into the like I said, I can't even talk. Into your physiology. Wow. But your body is at a natural parasympathetic state. So you heard of sympathetic and parasympathetic. Another word for that is fight or flight, which is sympathetic, or rest and digest, which is parasympathetic. So our body naturally sits at this parasympathetic state. When we run, the whole point is to get us into a sympathetic state by race time. So when we get to a sympathetic state, blood is diverted from other parts of the body into the muscles. If you notice when you're running fast, your digestion sort of stops. That's why sometimes when people run longer races and their digestion kind of wigs out, is because they may be absorbing something into their body that their body doesn't have enough blood to kind of figure things out. So parasympathetic and sympathetic. So when you warm up, you're moving your body from this parasympathetic state or rest and digest state into a fight or flight state where your heart can beat faster. And it's kind of like if you're flying an airplane, you manually have to fight yourself, and then you flip it to autopilot, and it goes to a whole different group of systems. So your body's the same way. You go from parasympathetic to sympathetic. So that may be a lot. We can talk about that another time. That's also why when you sleep, your resting heart rate is way down, is because when you sleep, your body is at the deepest level of parasympathetic that you can get. Man, I could talk about this stuff all day, but we're going to stop there. So an increase in core body temperature positively affects the biomechanics of a runner, as well as decreases the chance of injury, such as muscle strains. And there's some research that supports that, and I could post a link in a little bit. But there's three main things that warming up does. It increases the force capacity of a muscle. So force capacity is the amount of strength that a muscle can contract at. So the amount of power you have. It also decreases your chance for injury because your muscles are warm, they're moving, there's more blood. You're not quite as tight, things are nice and loose, as well as increased range of motion. So have you ever noticed when you wake up in the morning and you're very stiff and your body just can't move and you're just like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And then by the end of the day, you're like, wow, or maybe not by the end of the day, by lunchtime, you're like, okay, I'm moving, I feel a little bit better. That's because your body has warmed up. You've gone from that deep parasympathetic state to more of a higher parasympathetic pushing into sympathetic. All right, I got to stop myself. I'm going to keep going down that line. All right, so key takeaways. So research suggests that an active warm-up of 15 minutes at an intensity of approximately 65% of one's VO2 max was most beneficial. So Scott, not to call you out, Scott, but Scott loves to warm up hard. And that's just what he does, and he runs well. But in his mind, that's what helps him the most. But the research suggests a little differently. You shouldn't be hammering your warm-up. You shouldn't be, going super hard. You shouldn't be that labored. It should be an easy run, essentially. It should be something easy to just get your body moving. We'll talk about my warm-up routine in a second. But about 15 minutes or so is what the research says. So this is also very important. So let me tell a little bit of a story before I dive into this. So when I was in high school and college, and for most of my running career, I always tried to show up to a race an hour early and start warming up that entire 45 minutes before the race. And then 15 minutes to go, I just kind of stop and just go to the start line. And that's what I would always do. And that's what I thought I was supposed to do. But the research actually suggests, and all of the scholars kind of can agree on this, what I'm about to share. So it says, perhaps the most important finding regarding warming up is not the exact intensity or the duration, but rather the time duration between the cessation of warm-up and the start of competition. So the most important part is when you stop warming up and when the gun goes off. So if you warm up and then you have 30 minutes to do nothing, and then you go to the start line and then try and run, you're not going to have a great time. If you warm up all the way to the minute the gun goes off, you're going to be a lot warmer, but you may have already pushed your heart too far into the red zone if you've gone too hard in the warm-up. So the benefits gained via an increase in muscle temperature are lost approximately 15 minutes after the warm-up period ends. So that's why it's important to make sure you're really warm within 15 minutes to race time. Because if you're not, your heart's not going to be pumping as fast, your lungs aren't going to be moving as well, your muscles are going to cool down a little bit. You're just going to kind of get a little stiffer. So therefore, the time between the end of the warm-up and the start of the competition should be no longer than 15 minutes. So boom. If you don't listen to anything else tonight, remember that. This is the key takeaway. Make sure your warm-up is within it finishes within 15 minutes of the gun going off. All right. So another kind of hot topic, get it, hot topic, is cooling down, or are we warming down? So the popularly believed benefit of cooling down is to bring down the heart rate in a steady fashion while allowing the muscle to gradually return to normal tension levels. But the one subject all physiologists can seem to agree on is that after abruptly ceasing intense exercise such as running, the blood vessels in the legs are dilated, and therefore blood can pool quickly in the legs and feet. This can result in an individual feeling dizzy and potentially passing out, I should say passing out, because of a lack of blood flow to the brain. So sometimes people think, well, I got to go do a cool down. I need to go run some more. And that's great. That works for you. That's great. The research, there's people saying, well, maybe you don't need to do that because, what else are you trying to do? The blood's going to just be there. But while this is a good reason to implement some sort of cool down, especially after running, there does not seem to be any other physiological reason, meaning you're not going to recover faster. You're not going to have less soreness. Let's see. I've been doing a little bit better with more, so that's good. But yeah, so one could deduce that lying down with the legs elevated to reduce or eliminate blood pooling would be just as, if not more effective than a short cool down after intense exercise. So see, there's kind of conflicting information. So now what? So most of us just don't stop moving, and most of us don't just stand still after a hard workout. There's some degree of moving or walking around or some kind of cool down. So bottom line, as long as you're just moving around, that's a good enough cool down. You don't need to go run another like 6 or 7 miles. You don't need to go hard anymore. You just keep moving. I mean, none of us are professional athletes. They kind of cool down and warm up a little differently, but for the majority of us, this is kind of what we have to do. All right. So I pulled this from the Luke Humphrey running book, as well as some of the information from the website. So there's things called dynamic warming up and form drills. So when I warm up, I usually run 1 mile to 2 miles. It's easy to get things moving. And then I'll go through a series of this. So I'll do that run. I'll do dynamic warming up first. So that includes arm circles, trunk rotations, front and side leg swings, hurdle trail legs. In a couple of slides, I'll show you some pictures of what these are. And you could check out YouTube for some of them too. But I'll go through kind of these dynamic warm-ups to get things moving. And then I'll go into form drills. So form drills focus specifically on running form. So there's walking lunge, there's slow skips, there's high knees, there's butt kicks, there's bounding. And these are all great things to get your body loose and warm. So I apologize if this picture is a little blurry. I'm not going to get into all this. You can check it out when I post it. But basically, this is what they are: arm circles, trunk rotations, front leg swings. Some of these are kind of funny, like this guy. I don't know what he's doing, but so that's warming up and cooling down. So I challenge you guys, next time you go do some speed work or you have a race, whenever we get to race again, hopefully soon, do some kind of warm up and include some of these drills, include some of this form of dynamic warming up, and just kind of see how you feel going into the race. I know for me personally, if I don't warm up correctly or, excuse me, if I don't warm up well enough, I have a lot harder race. Now, some of you may say, well, Jason, what about a marathon? Why I'm running 26 miles, do I really need to warm up? It's good to warm up a little bit for a marathon. Not a tremendous amount, but just make sure your body's loose. It makes a big difference to me, definitely. So that's my challenge to you guys. Coming up next week, actually this weekend, we're going to be having a special guest speaker talk to us about running nutrition. Man, my throat's dry. I guess it's time to get off this computer. 45 minutes. Oh my gosh. All right. We have a special guest speaker talking about running nutrition. That's going to be Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. So 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, whatever. Excuse me. Woo. Need some water or something. Yeah, so her name's Lindsay. She's actually a member of this group. She's going to give us some great information. Lindsay works with a Division I college program. She also has ton of clients that she works with. She's been featured in all kinds of amazing organizations and news outlets, and she knows her stuff. So I'm super excited to get her on here Sunday. She's going to bring the heat and drop a lot of great knowledge, great facts and tidbits and knowledge for us. So that's Sunday. I'll make an event for that after this. And then we have 2 more topics before the month is over. One is going to be called mind hacking, and I'm pretty excited for that one. This is all about mindset as well as overcoming some of the motivational issues that we all face. We all succumb to them sometimes. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I don't have a specific date for that one yet because I'm still waiting to hear on our last speaker, actually a chiropractor who specializes in running. He works specifically with runners, and he helps them with their injuries and rehab and prehab and all that good stuff. And I'm waiting to hear back what day works best for him. But what I'm thinking is that night or afternoon or whatever, we'll do it via Zoom, like kind of a workshop style. So we'll all have our lovely faces on the screen, and we all see each other, and we could all ask questions, and we could kind of go through the whole thing that he's teaching us. So that's kind of the game plan. Hope you guys have a great Friday night. I hope everyone's healthy and safe, and we'll see you Sunday. See you guys.